You are tuned in to The Low Band Show, broadcasting from the storm drains under the big city, where a tunnel crew runs this booth on salvaged gear, pipes humming, steady water dripping, piping surface science and tech news on a low band signal through the drains. I'm your host, Max Hertz. Welcome in. Here's what we do. We take real science and tech news from the surface, summarize it, then go deeper to educate, entertain, and shed light on what's in store for our collective future. News from the net, clear signal, and a little tunnel. If you came for hype, you took a wrong turn at the storm drain.
Welcome in, everyone. Max Hertz here in the booth, settled in and ready for another run through the surface feed. Wiz, good to have you on the mic with me today.
Good to be here, Max. Let's see what kind of noise we've got on the wire today.
We have a packed board today, looking at everything from military overhauls and medical breakthroughs to some massive shifts in AI policy and software integration. First up, we're looking at South Korea's ambitious plan to train its entire military as drone warriors, followed by some incredible research into how non-invasive brain stimulation is helping curb deep-seated addictions. We'll also dive into Claude's science and how designing antibiotics via text prompts is becoming a reality, and take a look at Microsoft's preview of native Linux containers running inside Windows. And finally, we have news of the administration dropping restrictions on Anthropic's Mythos and Fable models. Plenty to unpack, so let's get into it. The headline promises a near-futuristic fighting force, but let's look at the plans. Ars Technica reported on June 26, 2026, that South Korea wants drones to be a universal combat tool. Wiz, they plan to, quote, train every single member of its nearly 500,000-strong military to operate drones.
Sounds chaotic, but it's a cold-blooded calculation. When your neighbor has over 1 million active troops and you have less than half of that, you stop trying to match bodies and start looking for a force multiplier.
The defense minister cited recent conflicts as inspiration. The report notes, quote, Ukraine's use of drones as a force multiplier to offset its numerical disadvantage may carry special resonance. Wiz, for listeners who don't know, what is a force multiplier?
Simply put, it's any technology that dramatically increases a soldier's combat effectiveness. If one soldier with a drone can do the work of an entire squad, you've multiplied your force without needing more boots on the ground.
They're starting with 11,000 training drones this year, but there's a supply hurdle. The Defense Ministry is looking to procure drones with 100% domestic components and 0 Chinese parts.
Good luck with that. Almost every commercial drone on the planet relies on Chinese components for flight controllers or batteries. Going completely clean is going to choke their procurement timeline.
On the organizational side, the Korea Times reports that the former Drone Operations Command headquarters will be reorganized to focus on collaborating with South Korean industry on developing and procuring commercial drone technology.
Smart play. If they want 60,000 drones by 29, they need to bypass slow military pipelines. Streamlining procurement is the only way to get these systems built, let alone distributed to every conscript.
Whether they can pull off that level of domestic manufacturing remains to be seen. Let's move on to our next story. The Jerusalem Post reported on June 26, 2026, that doctors at Haifa's Rambam Healthcare campus successfully treated their first Israeli opioid addiction patient using an experimental non-invasive brain technology. And here's the headline. Non-invasive stimulation of the brain ended opioid addiction, cigarette craving. This matters because it targets addiction at its physiological roots. Wiz, they targeted the nucleus accumbens, quote, the core of the brain system responsible for feelings of satisfaction, pleasure, and reward.
The nucleus accumbens is the classic reward hub. Blunt the craving signals there, and you disrupt the feedback loop of addiction. But doing that from outside the skull, without surgery, is a massive leap in precision.
The report explains the treatment, based on technology from the company Insightec, is carried out with the help of a new technology that performs non-invasive neuromodulation without heating or burning tissue. Wiz, for listeners who don't know, what is neuromodulation actually doing in the brain?
It means using external energy, like magnetic fields or ultrasound, to alter nerve activity. You can either stimulate the target area to increase its activity, or suppress it to damp down overactive networks without damaging the underlying structure.
The results were immediate. Tests carried out a week later produced negative results for opioids. The patient reported a craving score of 0 out of 10 and went from smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day to just a few, with no urge to use alcohol.
Going from 3 packs a day to almost 0 is wild. But we have to remember this is an N of 1 case study. A single patient reporting a 0 craving score is highly encouraging, but it doesn't constitute a randomized clinical trial.
Still, the medical team is looking ahead. Dr. Levtov says, "This experience opens doors for us to treat a wide range of very serious illnesses, such as PTSD, OCD, eating disorders, other addictions." Wiz, for listeners who only know OCD as a general term, what are they hoping to target there?
Obsessive-compulsive disorder involves hyperreactive, repetitive loops between the cortex and the deeper brain. They want to damp down that chronic, overactive loop to disrupt the obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors.
It's a single patient, so we need large-scale clinical trials before we call this a therapeutic revolution. But the pathway is open. We'll be watching. Let's move on to our next story. The headline promises customized antibiotics designed from simple text prompts. Let's see what the system actually does. Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News reported on June 30th, 2026, that Anthropic launched Claude Science. Wiz, they say it connects, quote, more than 60 scientific databases and tools through a single interface.
Lowering that data friction is huge. Instead of wrangling dozens of command line tools and legacy databases, researchers get a single entry point. It turns a fragmented ecosystem into a unified workspace. But the output is still bound by the quality of those underlying models.
Basecamp Research is making its Eden models available on the platform. The report states they are used, quote, for tasks such as designing antibiotic peptides and predicting vaccine targets. Wiz, for listeners who may not know, what are peptides?
Think of them as short chains of amino acids, basically mini proteins that can target and disrupt bacterial cell membranes. Eden generates candidates based on target structures, turning a massive biochemical search space into a direct generation problem.
To see how that looks in practice, in a demo, a co-founder, quote, uploaded a sample patient microbiology report, and the platform designed peptides, predicted their efficacy, and provided a short list of candidates most likely to succeed in experiments in minutes.
Generating candidates in minutes is impressive, but let's maintain some perspective. You can click a button to generate designs, but synthesizing and validating those peptides in a wet lab still takes weeks or months. The physical bottleneck hasn't disappeared.
That reality check is critical. As the article notes, quote, generating human-ready antibiotics at the click of a button is still a step away. But they hope to democratize the tools. So, quote, potentially any clinician in the world can chat with Claude and design an antibiotic.
Which is the real shift. You do not need a cluster of GPUs or a PhD in bioinformatics to explore the design space anymore. If these generative pipelines prove reliable under lab testing, we are looking at a dramatic acceleration of early-stage discovery.
But whether these prompt-designed molecules actually work in living organisms remains to be seen. It is still early days, and clinical safety is not proven. Let's move on to our next story. The headline promises built-in Linux containers running directly inside Windows without third-party software. Let's see what the preview actually does. The Register reported on June 29, 2026, that Microsoft launched WSL containers. Wiz, here is how Microsoft describes it. WSL containers make it easier for developers and organizations to build, test, and run containerized workloads while benefiting from the security, manageability, and integration of the Windows platform.
That is the classic corporate pitch. Microsoft is essentially trying to keep developers on Windows by eliminating third-party utilities. It is a convenience feature wrapped in corporate compliance.
The Register notes that WSL's existing, quote, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint has been updated in private preview to be aware of Linux container events. Wiz, for listeners who may not know, what does MDE actually do?
It is Microsoft's centralized enterprise security tool that monitors devices for malware and suspicious activity. In this case, it means IT administrators can inspect what is happening inside your virtualized Linux environment directly from the Windows host. They want visibility into everything.
Microsoft also claims a new default file system, quote, makes Windows file access twice the speed. But they note these changes are only active inside WSL container paths for now. Wiz, how big of a deal is that file system speed bump?
Twice the speed of terribly slow is still just slow. Since they are bypassing the default host path to avoid breaking mission-critical systems, it tells us the performance architecture is still highly experimental. I would not migrate production workflows just yet.
Whether these container tools will actually win over developers or just appease corporate administrators remains to be seen, as it is still early days for the preview. Let's move on to our next story. The fight here is really about national security leverage versus global market competition. TechCrunch reported on June 30th, 2026, that the government has lifted export restrictions on Anthropic's Mythos and Fable models. Wiz, this sudden reversal has the industry talking.
Lifted is one word for it. Let's call it a strategic retreat, because American AI companies are feeling the heat from overseas competitors. They had to put their toys back in the sandbox before everyone else bought different ones.
Let's look at the terms. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick announced Anthropic, quote, has agreed to proactively detect and address security risks associated with the models, to work diligently with the U.S. government on protocols and standards, and, quote, to inform the U.S. government of any malicious activity. Wiz, for listeners who might not be tracking these models, what are Mythos and Fable?
Mythos is their advanced tool designed to find software vulnerabilities, while Fable is a consumer-facing version built with more guardrails. Under these new rules, they're essentially promising a standard corporate compliance pinky swear. It's security theater with a government seal.
Well, the underlying motive is definitely being questioned. TechCrunch reports, quote, to them, the ban looked less like a security fix and more like leverage, a way for the Trump administration to punish Anthropic for its executives' public criticism. Wiz, does that political skepticism hold water?
Absolutely. Pledging to do this voluntarily was already Anthropic's stance months before the ban. The sudden restrictions felt less like a carefully calculated defense shield and more like a political squeeze play. The problem is, geopolitical realities don't wait for domestic score settling.
And those realities are shifting quickly. The report notes Asian AI companies are releasing models, quote, approaching Mythos-level capabilities, among them Fugu and Tulanfeng. Now, White House approval is still required for select customers of Mythos. Wiz, how practical is this gated access model?
It's highly impractical. Selecting which companies are approved by political teams is a slow, bureaucratic bottleneck. While American tech firms are waiting on White House clearance, global competitors are deploying their models at scale. It's a self-inflicted speed limit.
How these rules will play out in practice remains to be seen, as we are in the early days of this regulatory shift. Let's move on to our next story.
That is our board for today. We started with South Korea's ambition to manufacture and deploy military drone fleets, and then we looked at the early promise of non-invasive brain stimulation for complex addictions. We also ran through prompt-designed antibiotics, Microsoft's new Linux container tools for Windows, and the regulatory shift around Anthropic's Mythos models. Across all these stories, the common thread is clear. We are looking at early, unproven pathways that still need to demonstrate real-world scalability and safety. We will keep tracking these developments as they evolve. Our queue is already filling up with new build and science threads for the next session. Keep your skepticism calibrated, and we will pick up the thread when our next update drops.
It's certainly a lot to consider. If we missed an angle, or you have further questions on these topics, please drop us a comment. We read them down here in the tunnel.
And if this signal helped you stay informed, a like or subscribe keeps the pipes humming. More surface news and deeper dives are coming through the grate soon. Until then, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time on the Low Band Show.